1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Kate McIntyre, Master of Wine. Kate is the Director of Wine Business at Moorooduc Estate on the Mornington Peninsula, which was established in 1982 by her parents, Richard and Jill. I read on Kate's website that there are more astronauts in the world than MWs. Maybe so, but put an MW in space and suddenly they're not so clever, are they, Kate? Anyway, we spoke about bald sopranos and singing the praises of absurdist theatre, feigning a love of wine before falling head over heels, yearning to return to the dreaming spires and teaching stagecraft to snotty schoolkids, the short-term online wine club that ran and ran, the Italian job and dodging a bullet as a sales rep, fueling backpacker travels with stolen sachets of chocolat chaud, abstaining from beauty contests and learning that knowledge makes people gorgeous on the inside. The growing pains of Mornington Peninsula Pinot Noir and Wine Nebbiolo is the next big thing. Well, who knows? Onion tarts and skinsy brie and relishing a surprise for your dinner guests, and uttering assurances of love in times of isolation. I started by asking Kate about the time before Moorooduc was even a Moorooducling.
Well, I'm the first of four. My parents lived in Melbourne until I was 4 years old. And then my father, who was a junior student surgeon at the time, as all Australian junior surgeons, had to go and do some work experience somewhere else. So we went to England and he got a job in Oxford, and we were supposed to be there for 6 to 12 months and we stayed for 4 years. So I went there when I was 4, came back when I was 8. I had one sister when we left and I had 2 sisters and a brother when we got back. So that was quite a busy early childhood. I think that part of that made me fall in love with the idea of the UK, because coming home to Australia felt like such a long way away, and having lived there for 4 years, from when I could kind of really start remembering intimate details about my life, that was pretty special. So when I came back to Australia, I had trouble reintegrating into a social life here because I had a posh English accent, which I did lose in about 2 weeks. But also at the time, Dad had come up with this great idea when he was away. He'd always loved Australian wine and always loved the idea of wine as a student. And when we were in England, he met some like-minded young doctors who had contacts in Oxford with the wine tasting club and that kind of thing. And he learnt about Burgundy and Bordeaux and sort of got very excited about the idea of maybe having a little farm of his own where he could grow some grapes and make some wine and retire to that as a second career. So it was never really a hobby for him, but it was always a plan for it to be the second stage of his life, growing and making wine. When we left Australia in 1976, there was really no Victorian wine industry around Melbourne. It was all sort of further north in Rutherglen and Central Victoria and that kind of thing. So when we came back 4 years later, the Yarra Valley had blossomed, and he met people through his medical connections and also through kindergarten, which is how all parents make all of their connections, who knew wine people. And through a couple of introductions, he met a guy called Gary Crittenden, who was looking for land down in this funny little peninsula called Mornington. And Gary took Dad under his wing and they looked for land together and found the 2 properties almost at the same time. Dad is not very romantic about his grape growing and winemaking career. He always thinks of it as being a practicality, but he does say that when he stepped onto this property, he fell in love with it immediately. It was a big empty paddock with nothing on it except for a dead tree. It's on top of a hill. It's not a very big hill. We're about 90 metres above sea level here, but you do get a nice view across to Port Phillip Bay on a clear day. And he just felt like it was a really good place to grow grapes and make wine, which was good because he really didn't know what he was doing. He just fell in love with it and got a good feeling about it. And that was how Moorooduc Estate began. And that was in 1982 that they bought the property. And then in 1983, he started planting vines and, trying to get things started. And as the eldest of 4, I was at an age that I wasn't old enough to be left at home alone, but I also was not a baby. My sisters both did ballet very seriously. I didn't because I got kicked out of ballet school because I couldn't point my toe properly. I'm an excellent dancer, but not a ballerina. And so I had the choice of going and sitting in ballet school all day on a Saturday with Mum and the baby, or I could come to Moorooduc with Dad. which was the lesser of two evils. And just as those kind of years rolled out, I was down here every week. We lived in Melbourne. I went to school in Melbourne, but every weekend we would come down to the vineyard as it became. We planted all the trees around the property. We planted the vines in various parcels. So out the front of the house now is the oldest vines, our old Chardonnay vines that we planted in 1983. Then other bits of the property got planted out. My sister and I had horses down here for a while. Mum and Dad were trying to think of ways to make it more appealing for us to spend a lot of time down here when we weren't at school. So Beck and I had horses. They were both ratbag horses and we were not very accomplished horsewomen, but we had a lot of fun riding around. Mum and Dad built a tennis court here again in an attempt to bribe us. I have always hated tennis. I love the idea of it, but I'm hopeless at it. I'm a bit uncoordinated as far as team sports are concerned. Yeah, I just got into helping Dad out for pocket money with the pruning in winter and the winemaking during vintage. And it was the thing that I had to do on the weekends when I'd done all my homework.
Yeah, right. So aside from the vineyard, which we'll talk about a lot more, at that young age then with your Pommy English accent and growing up among the dreaming spires, spat out by big ballet and working the vineyard, what were the other things that you did apart from riding the horses and the things you did down here as a child, coming from a very accomplished scientific father and the background that you had there among the academics, I suppose? What was your sort of path looking like, or what were your interests academically, etc.?
Yeah, so we were never like drilled that we were supposed to be academic, but it was just sort of expected in our family that you'd do well at school and you'd go to university and you'd do something important. And I remember at school in year 9, the careers advisor said to me when I was choosing my subjects, and I was leaning very much towards the arts. I loved languages. I loved English. I loved studying novels and plays and poetry in English. And I studied Italian and French at school as well. And I found all of that really incredible. I was quite good at maths, but I didn't like doing maths homework. So I did maths A and maths B in 11. And my maths teacher said to me in the middle of the year, he said, if you're failing maths A, Kate, you know you can't do maths B. And I was getting A's in maths B and failing maths A. I was just like, oh, this is not for me. I did chemistry up to the end of year 12 because my father, a good scientific doctor, said no matter what you choose to do after school, you really need to have a good science background. And the careers advisor said to me, don't you want to be a doctor like your father? And I said, oh God, no, couldn't think of anything worse. And she said, oh, well, you'll have to be a lawyer then. And I said, well, no, that also sounds dreadful and boring. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a huge thirst for knowledge. I loved communicating. I did a lot of public speaking and debating as well as theatre at school, and learning lines and getting up and being someone else for a period, and also expressing myself in a clever and sort of eloquent way was really important for me at school. It probably made it a bit difficult for me to make friends sometimes because I was quite competitive as well. But yeah, I had a huge desire to travel because after we came back from England, because Dad sunk all of his time and effort and spare money into the vineyard, and also I think because Mum and Dad were so traumatised about travelling with small children to and from England in those early days, we never went anywhere else for the rest of my childhood apart from up to Falls Creek once a year. Mum and Dad had got married and gone skiing for their honeymoon, even though Mum hated the snow and the cold. It was very important for Dad. And we would have a family holiday up at Falls Creek at a lodge that my grandparents had helped build. You know, so it's that one of those kind of things that people go, oh, skiing, it's very expensive. And yes, it is. But we did it sort of probably the cheapest, most basic way that you could do it. And it was also, I still don't know how Mum did it, self-catered. She would pack up the car with 4 children and enough food to feed us for 2 weeks and take it up to the snow. It was incredible. So our holidays were skiing. We'd go to Tasmania in summer to go and visit my grandparents who had retired down there. And I remember Dad dragging us off to visit these baby vineyards and wineries like Piper's Brook and spending time with Andrew Peary, who I thought was, at the time, was incredibly boring but very handsome because they just talked about wine all the time and that was incredibly boring. And the Richardsons, who started Delamere as well, and we used to ride around bareback on their Clydesdale, and the kids were feral and we all went feral, and it was good fun times.
Yeah, sounds like it. And so when did you manage to get overseas? Because you're quite a francophile as well from a relatively young age. So how did that come about?
Absolutely. So I was very lucky to have the opportunity to go and live with a French family for the summer holidays at the end of year 11, year 12. So I did an exchange then. All my friends were going off to do the Central Australia trip that a lot of people do at that time. And Mum and Dad said, well, you can't do both. I'm like, I just want to go to France. So I did that, and that was amazing. Stayed in Angoulême. So we were quite close to Cognac, not that far from Bordeaux. My family took me to visit a cognac distillery and got me really drunk at the age of 16 or 17. But that was really fun, and that really spurred me on to take French, my language, seriously. I came home and my French teacher at school was this very eloquent and elegant Parisian woman, and she was horrified because I developed in the 6 weeks I was away this incredible Charentaise accent and dreadful, dreadful language. So she had to beat that out of me before the year 12 exams. So I did that, and then as soon as I finished school, I was like, I'm taking a gap year, I'm out of here. And I got that all set up, and I did it through an organisation that organises gap years for people. And I had an amazing piece of luck there because I'd said to them, I'd really like to go and work in a school. I'd love to go somewhere near Oxford because I lived there. And they went, oh, you can't choose where you go. And I said, oh, that's okay. I just registered that. And I got a phone call the night before my first VCE exam saying, we've had someone drop out of a program at a girls' boarding school in Oxford. You'd have to be there on the 2nd of January. Would you like the job? It's a year. And I went, absolutely. I worked out how I was going to pay for it and everything afterwards. But so that all worked out. So I went back and lived in Oxford for a year, went across the ditch quite a few times, very low budget, went backpacking over summer, got a real taste for sort of really, we were spending $20 a day, if that. We were very selective about what food we were allowed to eat. We stayed in youth hostels where you could steal the breakfast for lunch and, all that sort of stuff. And it was great fun. And I remember that we once really, we went crazy when we were in Portugal and bought a Tetra Pak of sangria. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever drunk. Even back then, I thought that was pretty awful. Because unfortunately, having a parent or two parents who loved wine, I was quite spoilt at the table growing up as well. Mum and Dad always let us taste, and as I got older they would offer me a small glass at 16, 17, 18. I never had that experience with wine or alcohol that a lot of young Australians do, that they hadn't been allowed to taste alcohol until they were 18 and then they made themselves sick on it. I don't think I had a hangover until I was in my 30s. And that was not my fault. But I think there's something to be said for learning about flavours and smells and respect of wine at the dinner table early on.
Yeah. Okay. So at this stage, you've had all the ingredients, which seems like a very apt term, to get into wine in quite a full way. But that wasn't actually what you were thinking career-wise.
No. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I studied drama and theatre studies and French at university. And when I was in third year, when I was thinking, how am I going to make this drama thing work for me? Monash University announced a scholarship for French students to do fourth year dissertation. And they said the first 8 people who sign up for this get a scholarship to go and study in France for 6 months. And I had absolutely no intention of continuing my studies to an honours year in French until that became an opportunity. I went, go and live in France for 6 months. That sounds good. So I did a bit more study for the last few months of third year and scraped through as number 8 on that program and went and lived in Lyon for 6 months. And my first dissertation topic that I put up to, I laugh at myself now, I wanted to do my dissertation on absurdist French modern theatre, looking at Eugene Ionesco. I loved his work. I just think he's hilarious. And I put on a production of La Cantatrice Chauve, the bald soprano, at university when I came back from France. But they'd said, we don't have anyone who knows anything about absurdist modern theatre, so you can't do your dissertation on that. Think of another topic. And Mum said, hey, why don't you do something like Elizabeth David did? Go and research food as a culture in France. And I went, well, that sounds all right. So I came up with a dissertation topic that was about the modern McDonald'sization of the French culture through looking at the bouchon of Lyon, the traditional restaurants, compared to how the Lyonnese working class eats today, or back then in 1996, and how fast food, particularly McDonald's, was sort of eroding French culture. And I wrote a 10,000-word dissertation in French in it, which I'm inordinately proud of and could never do now.
And actually quite a departure from absurdist theatre.
Absolutely. But I liked food. And I thought that sounds easy and that sounds fun. That sounds like a good excuse to spend a little bit of money on eating in restaurants that I didn't really have a budget for back then. So you could sort of see the way I was going, but I was just following my nose at that stage. I really had no plans for the future. I thought, well, once this is done, maybe I'll go back and do a postgraduate degree in travel because that was one thing. I'd like to be a writer. All these things that don't really exist anymore. Everyone books their own travel these days, so travel agents are out. And most writing is, you do it for the joy of it, not for actually trying to make a proper living out of it. Maybe.
I hear you. Yeah.
You disagree?
No, the joy. It gives me joy. It definitely doesn't give me a living.
No, and that's the really sad thing, because I think that if there was a way that talented writers could actually fund their writing from writing, then we'd have much more exciting stuff to read out there today. But I knew I had to get a job because I knew that Mum and Dad had put all their money into Moorooduc and would continue doing that. And so I thought, well, I don't know, I'll see if I can do this theatre thing a little bit more. I'd worked out that I wasn't brave enough to try and be an actor. And I'd also had people sort of say, well, 2% of actors are actually in work. And I wasn't very good at working in restaurants. I wasn't a very good barista. I could work behind a bar, but they weren't things that really inspired me at all. And I thought, okay, well, I loved directing. I loved organising. I loved being in charge. And I'd done quite a lot of directing of plays at school and at uni, and that was something that I felt that I could have a go at. So I applied for a course at the Victorian College of the Arts, a director's course. That would have been in 1996, 95, anyway, around about that time. And Jeff Kennett pulled the funding for the course for the year. And so I had a year to fill in, and I thought, well, I'll get a job for 6 months and then I'll go travelling to the places I didn't get to go to last time. And I applied for jobs in bookshops and I applied for jobs in wine shops because I thought I could probably, make up enough about. I had no sales skills whatsoever, but Philip Murphy interviewed me for the job of assistant to the fine wine manager in the Toorak store. And not everyone would know what that means, but back in those days, Philip Murphy's stores were amazing and Toorak was the flagship store. I got the job because I could speak French and Italian. I could read the labels. I presented pretty well. I sounded reasonably intelligent and I picked things up really quickly. And I also lied in the job interview and said, I want to learn everything that I can about wine. I'm really interested. Mum and Dad have got a vineyard. I've helped out with the winemaking, but I don't know much about the world of wine. This was just my ploy to get back overseas. I'm like, Italian wine, French wine, don't know much about that. Would love to learn about, they make wine in Spain too. Yes, like to learn that too. So I wasn't interested in Australian wine at the time. I sold it. I was very happy to sell it. But it took me a long time to get over my obsession/fascination with things from a long way away. That Australian kind of looking over there when there's really good stuff right here. I really embodied that.
But it's quite an impressive trick, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah. Being the translator of things that are exotic.
Absolutely.
And I can see that. And also playing a role, because you kind of were. Like, it wasn't that you were totally pretending. It was interesting to you and you could do something special. I guess people were, in a sense, looking at you on the stage being really impressive, translating these labels and telling them what they meant. But at the same time, performing in a way that you hadn't expected.
Absolutely. And performing in a theatre where I was the star, because I had all these lovely young men working with me. Some of them were very passionate about Australian wine. Some of them just were working there to earn some money, and they did the box stacking and the shelf stacking and stuff like that. There were a couple who really, really wanted to learn about other wines, but I was like, apart from my two bosses, and that was Philip Rich before he left and went off to do other things, and then Michael McNamara, they left me in charge of the fine wine department, and we got to the stage where as long as we could sell it, we could buy it. So it was a really privileged position to be in. I didn't realise it until later on how privileged it was. But they also, because I picked things up quickly and I said I wanted to learn, they took me seriously and sent me to tastings and sent me to classes. And so I went and did Michael Trembath's Italian wine course, and that was amazing. And at the end of his course, he said, by the way, Gin and I go to Italy every year. You'd have to fund yourself to get over there, but there's lots of free dinners and stuff, and you get to taste some wine. You can come along with us to Italy. If anyone's interested, just come and have a talk to me after class. I'm like, are you serious? Can I come? And he's like, yeah. And so I went to Italy with Michael and Virginia, and that was another eye-opener, because I'd been to Italy backpacking, choosing whether I could afford to have a gelato or a slice of pizza for my lunch. And then we did this incredible trip where we were going to Piemonte, and then we went to the Veneto for Vinitaly. I couldn't do the whole trip because it was too expensive for me, and they'd been in Tuscany for a week beforehand. And I was really jealous because they're like, we've eaten this and we've drunk that. And I'm like, damn it, I wish. But, we went to Piedmont and went to these incredible restaurants and drank Old Barolo, and I'm like, I've got no idea what this is, but it's amazing and it's so cool. And it snowed when we were coming out of so all of those, I still have really strong memories of that early learning stage, and that's really imprinted on me my love for exploring and discovering new things and brilliant things about wine from anywhere in the world. And that still drives me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a step up as well from stealing sachets of hot chocolate and butter pats from your hostel in France.
And ham if you were in Germany.
And then the Italian thing stuck a bit more, didn't it?
Yeah, so two things happened. Philip put his business up for sale and it was bought by Vintage Sellers, and I worked out really early on when this was all happening. I thought, I don't want to work for a big group and chain. I've had too much fun here. I've had too much self-determination in this job. And I think I need to go and do something else. I need to expand my wine knowledge. I need to expand my experience. I need to do something else. I had at that stage as well just signed up for the Master of Wine course back in those days, and that was in 1999 that I went to my first seminar. You didn't have to have any prior qualifications as long as you'd worked in the wine industry for a while and you could prove that you were eloquent and could write an essay. And I could kind of flub that and sound better than I actually was at the time. And that was also due to Michael Trembath because he was studying for his MW, because I was like, I need to do some study because I'm in my late 20s and people are not taking me seriously, and I think I need to be a serious wine person now. You know, what should I do? I don't want to study wine marketing or winemaking because I don't want to be a winemaker or a wine marketer, which is ironic because that's what I do now to a certain extent. But I didn't value that at the time. I valued being out in the world and being sort of a boss and someone who made pronouncements about things. You know, I was still thinking maybe I'll be a writer, maybe I'll be a wine writer. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I thought, well, I better do something else. So Michael and Virginia offered me a job, and back then Trembath and Taylor was a small two-person band. They did all their everything, just the two of them, and they really needed an extra person on hand to help develop the business. So that was my new role as business development manager for Trembath and Taylor, and that was wonderful for the first year. It was wonderful because I'm not a great salesperson. If I'm not selling wine that I am passionate about, and I'm not teaching people about it, and I'm not talking to people who have equal passion for it, I get dismayed and put off the whole sale thing very easily. I'm not hungry to go out and sell 500 cases of something just to prove that I can make that target. That never, ever sort of resonated with me. And the business development side of things was great because I was going up to Sydney a few times a year because Michael had got sick of doing all the travel. I went up to Brisbane a couple of times, going to see, a handful of people over a couple of days who were really interested. So that was easy and that was fun. I reckon I might have possibly met Bree back then when she was working, I think she was working for The Grape for a very short period of time, but I don't think we recognised each other until much later after we re-met later on. And then Trembath and Taylor had an opportunity to expand, and they brought two other businesses into the business and became T3 Fine Wines, which is a much bigger business, a lot of Australian wines in the portfolio, and the Italian portfolio was kind of a nice little added extra on the side. And I went from being business development manager for this little Italian wine company where I got to write some newsletter and go and see some people and blah, 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 to working for this big company that had offices in all the major cities, teams in all the major cities, and big amounts of wine that we had to sell. And so I then became the lead restaurant city Melbourne rep, which I wasn't very good at.
That's fair enough. And I think it's always good to recognise what you are and what you're not so good at, because the roles are so different, and it's easier to sell enthusiasm than wine at times. Sometimes they cross over quite nicely, but not always.
And I gave it a red hot go, and about in year 3, and I was having trouble kind of balancing my work and my study, and I said to Michael and Virginia, look, I just think I need a break from this. And they said, why don't you take a few months off, study full time, we'll cover you with someone else. Matt Paul came in to sub for me, and after the 4 months that I took off to study full time, I was dreading this meeting with Michael and Virginia, and I went in and I said, look, I'm really sorry, I don't think I can come back, I just don't think this is for me. And they just kind of looked at each other and went, good. We agree, and Matt is so good at what he does, and we were all in ferocious agreement about that.
You all dodged a bullet.
Absolutely. So but I've always, because I spent years working with them and going to Italy with them and helping them taste wine and working with their growers in Italy, that was a really special time for me, and I met some pretty amazing people and had some incredible adventures in Italy, and it's put Italy in a very special place in my heart, both as a place that produces incredible wines. The food is awesome. the people are beautiful. After we were locked down for 3 years or whatever it was in the COVID years, the first place I had to go back to, I was surprised in myself. I thought it was going to be France, but it had to be Italy. And I went to Italy for 2 weeks and spent some time in Tuscany. And that was what I needed after not being able to go anywhere for 3 years. It has this incredible history. It's modernized. Italian winemakers and grape growers have become obsessed with making world-class wine. It's not drunk very much in Italy by Italians, but it's all over the world now. And you look at the Italian culture in Australia, and it's really weird because we've got some of the best Italian food in Australia at top level and entry level and everywhere in between. We've got a huge number of Italian immigrants who have come over here from a couple of generations ago, who have brought all their culture with them and taught us to make good coffee and how to make passata and ricotta and all of those things. But Italian wine hasn't really, Italian grape varieties, I think, and I don't want to offend anyone, but there's so much more potential for Italian grape varieties in Australia than we see at the moment. There's a handful of people doing really great things with Nebbiolo. Prosecco, obviously, that conversation goes on, and that's exciting, but not really where I want to be in the wine world. That's okay, because lots of other people do, so that's okay. We've just planted some Nebbiolo vines in our vineyard here at Moorooduc on a complete whim that they might do well here, because I think a lot of the study that we do on what works where in Australia has been done on looking at sunshine hours and degree days and, you know, the things on graphs and plots and things, and not standing in the vineyard going, oh, we get quite a lot of sunshine here, but we also get quite a lot of cloud over summer, and we've got quite a long growing period, and that's quite similar to Piemonte. So maybe you don't need as much heat as people think that you need for Piemonte. Maybe it's the amount of sunshine and cloud that you get, because ours all got sunburnt last year when we had those 3 hot days. It got absolutely decimated. So that was a lesson. But also learning how, you know, going into the vineyards in Italy and seeing how they prune. Successful Italian vines grow completely differently from French grape varieties, and we just, in Australia, we come and bung them in the ground and everything grows the same way, and we prune everything the same way, and that doesn't always work either. So maybe being a little bit humble and listening to what the experts who've been doing it for a while have to say in their own country. I still find that really fascinating as well, and talking to grape growers in Tuscany who are growing beautiful Sangiovese. And I think, you know, I said to someone, I think maybe we don't have the right clone of Sangiovese in Australia, and he said, that's such an Australian thing to say. It's not that you don't have the right clone, you just don't pay enough attention to how to manage it in the vineyard. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense too.
I mean, the other thing is as well, you can go over to Barolo or Burgundy or somewhere else, and different people's mentalities as to what lessons they're actually learning from the person that they're listening to can vary wildly. For a lot of people, the idea of a mimetic wine is potentially the kind of oak they use, or it might be hardware, or it might be specific farming conditions, and, you know, also looking at soils and other climatic data, as opposed to accepting that it's a really weird confluence of things that make the magic of a place, and maybe you're going to find the weird confluence of things that make your wines extra special too. And it's really paying attention to what are the details that could actually be doing that, and how do you work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've never done vintage anywhere else but at Moorooduc Estate, and people find that a bit weird and a bit narrow-minded of me. But I never dreamt of being a winemaker. I'm very glad that my father at 80 is still 100% full-time in the business, and that we have an amazing winemaker and general manager in Jeremy Magyar, who has the technical training and understands all of that stuff. For me, I call myself laughingly the style judge. That comes from my years of also finding out that I'm not a great show judge. I did quite a bit of show judging. Hate it. Because I hate beauty competitions. And when you've got 30 wines lined up and you've got to decide which is the most beautiful in less than 30 minutes and discard everybody else, I'm like, these wines have got more to tell us than we've got time to listen in this scenario. So I would always call myself the style judge, also because I'm dreadful at faults. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. And it's like, that's horrifically Brettanomyces. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, okay, now you say that, I can see it. But, you know, I think working with Italian wine for a long time, I have a very high tolerance for acetic acid, you know, and I'm not that interested even now in the chemical names for things. It's more what the wine smells like, what it tastes like, how it makes me feel, where it takes my brain. I read stories about people who have synesthesia, and I kind of wish I did have synesthesia, but I feel like wine has that sort of effect on me. I don't see colours when I hear music or whatever, but when I smell wine, it takes me places. And it's very specific and it's very, I want to spend time listening to what that wine has to say compared to that wine. That was why I decided I wanted to be a master of wine, because I thought if I can do that for all the wines of the world, that would be amazing. And then I had to relearn how to taste, because I couldn't just taste everything and remember it. I don't have that good a memory.
No, but the master of wine, I suppose, has given you what you wanted when you said that you wanted to have a serious place, right? It allows you to perform in lots of different ways with sincerity, but also with lots of different kinds of people and lots of different kinds of brains and lots of approaches to the art and science of wine. And that must feel like it's paid off quite a lot, because that personality that you brought and that enthusiasm that you brought, and knowing what you like, there are elements of wine judging that I stick up for, applications that I feel like can be useful, but all of these things, to my mind, should always be part of a much larger palette of tools of appreciation. But likewise, being a hardcore sales animal, you found that wasn't your thing. So it feels like you've sort of really found your home being quite a nomadic wine experience.
Absolutely. And I think I never imagined that I would come back to work full-time for the family business. I didn't really think that was a thing in my early days. And then when I realised it was a thing, I thought that was a failure. I hadn't made a name for myself. I hadn't sort of reinvented myself or whatever. And the more I studied, by the time I passed the Master of Wine exam, it made me appreciate what was happening here. And I was in a very lucky position that mum and dad also valued what I brought back to the business, because it's not just a sales role. It's definitely not just a winemaking role or a vineyard role. That's not me, although I can muck in and help out with the best of them for all of those things. But it is the storytelling and it's the teaching. And I think having the opportunity to run a little, wine school out of the Moorooduc business as part of my Moorooduc role, that's a real luxury, and also I think very valuable both for me and for people's recognition of Moorooduc Estate. We've now taught WSET to at least half the Mornington Peninsula, I reckon, over the years, which has been really fun. And teaching people about wine and seeing them have the aha moments that I had over the years, and being able to express that to them and make things that were sounding like gobbledygook to them in the first instance make sense. I guess it's like learning a language, isn't it? Again, it's that kind of combination of language and theatre and seeing the different layers of things, because wine is just fermented grapes. But looking past that, it's this beautiful combination of art and science, and it's like anything else that's unessential to human life but enriches it when you kind of indulge in the right way with it. You don't want to spend your whole life in an art gallery staring at pictures, and you probably shouldn't spend your whole weekend drinking multiple glasses of wine, but spending time admiring and getting to know something in a thoughtful way, I think is something that's become more and more important to me. And I think that having the opportunity to be a Master of Wine, that was the first thing that I ever studied that I wasn't sure whether I could do. And it took me a long time, and I got a lot of support from a lot of people. But in the end, it is your own journey and it's your own thing that you work out how to do. So succeeding there gave me a sense of achievement. But then it was like, what do I do with this now? And a lot of people say to me, well, what are you doing just working at your little family vineyard? It's like, well, this is where I can do the most, because I can do all the family business stuff and take this little plot of land to the next generation and hopefully to the next, and make it an inheritance rather than just my parents' folly, which it was for a long time. A successful folly, I think, but until people want to take it further through the generations. And that's a conversation that's been had down here on the Mornington Peninsula a lot recently. There's a lot of people who started businesses that they love and have made beautiful wine, but none of their kids are interested. So then what happens? Well, then they have to sell it, and they've put so much work and so much time, and land prices have gone up. And once you've sold it to someone, then that person spent millions of dollars on it, and then they're never going to recoup those costs in making and selling Mornington Peninsula wine. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle. And I've just gone on a complete rant all over the place and back again in one day.
Well, I'm going to bring us back right here to Moorooduc, because it's an interesting name, very memorable name. Obviously, it's the name of the place where we are. Just situate us, if you will, within the Mornington Peninsula, and just give us an idea of the specific natural attributes of the site and this unofficial sub-region of the Mornington Peninsula.
So Moorooduc, as you say, is the proper ancient name of the region that Mum and Dad bought this property in. It stands for swampy ground, which doesn't sound like a great name for a place where you're going to grow grapes. But as I mentioned before, we are on top of a hill, and we've got a north-facing slope that goes down to the bottom of the hill, which is where the peninsula link is built through. They had terrible trouble building that road because it got so wet and swampy in winter. So we do get a lot of runoff down the hill in winter. It can get quite wet, but very sandy topsoil and sandy clay, so excellent drainage. Good sun exposure. A lot of people who are planting vineyards down here are not looking for north-facing vineyards anymore because of climate change, but so far it's still working for us. We're one of the northernmost vineyards on the Mornington Peninsula. We're situated almost equidistant between Mornington and Hastings, and we're about a 15-minute drive from Frankston.
Right, so that's midway between, I suppose, the influence of Port Phillip Bay and Western Ports, but with more influence coming from Port Phillip Bay side.
Port Phillip Bay, yeah. So we're about as far away from the water as you can be on the Mornington Peninsula, and we get a lot of our weather from the Port Phillip Bay side that comes across. In summer, it comes across from Adelaide, comes across the desert, gets hotter and drier as it comes across. Those hot, dry winds hits Geelong, the Bellarine Peninsula, as hot and dry as it can be, and then it hits Port Phillip Bay before it gets to us. So it's still hot and dry, but just a little bit less hot and dry than it is on the other side of the water. We get a lot of cold winds and a lot of rain and occasionally hail coming across from that direction as well, and also from the east sometimes, but that's a less normal weather pattern. We're protected from the worst of the southerlies by the rest of the Mornington Peninsula because being at 90 metres above sea level and the highest point in this part of the peninsula, Red Hill, it goes up to 300 metres, so that protects us from the great southern cold winds.
Yeah, well, we should talk a little bit about Pinot Noir. I was recalling in 2013, I think it was, the Mornington Peninsula International Pinot Noir celebration. I think you were the MC for the event, or certainly one of the main ringleaders. I remember interviewing Jasper Morris MW in between sessions and you back then, and I didn't drag my notes out from our interview. Actually, I did look at Jasper's a few weeks ago, where it really struck me that in 13 years that conversation's changed a lot. Even then, that felt like quite an immature conversation for Mornington Peninsula Pinot Noir. So tell me whereabouts you think it's been and where it's going at the moment.
So the first vines that sort of still exist now were planted down here in 1972, and that was Elgee Park. That was Merlot and Cabernet and things like that. The first Pinot Noir vines were planted by Main Ridge in 1975, and then there was a little smattering of activity. Stonia, Merrick's estate, Crittenden, which was Dramana estate back then, my parents. I think I've missed someone out. Anyway, there were 5 or 6 of us that everyone was kind of wanting to do things, and Pinot Noir was a grape variety that people were very interested in. But back then, there was a thought that this was more of a Bordeaux-like climate. So people were planting Cabernet and Merlot and Cabernet Franc a lot. And the crazies, and Dad was one of them, insisted on planting Pinot Noir despite all of the experts advising against it. And there were a few reasons why the experts were advising against it. They didn't have any cool climate grape growing expertise in Australia back then. The really expert viticulturists worked in much warmer climates. They didn't work with Pinot Noir as a grape variety, and the Pinot Noir that had come out to Australia originally, apart from MV6, which kind of got to the Hunter Valley by mistake and sort of languished there for 100 years plus. The other varieties that were brought out in the 60s and 70s were varieties for sparkling wine. They were Swiss clones and then clones from UC Davis that weren't selected by anyone who knew anything about making quality table wine from Pinot Noir. So they were selected for being neat, upright growing vines and for producing big crops. Great for sparkling wine, not so good for table wine. We discovered fairly quickly, because we planted them here at Moorooduc, we had 2 rows of experimental Pinot Noir in the first planting, and then Richard planted the front block out to some of those UC Davis clones, and we gave them 30 years. And I still remember pulling them out about 15 years ago. It was horrific because the roots were so long and the vines, it was just horrible pulling those poor things out after they'd spent 30 years doing their best. But they just didn't perform in the way that and Pinot Noir lovers, Pinot Noir growers and makers in Australia are the biggest wine geeks in the world. And they benchmarked originally to Burgundy, and they've benchmarked to everywhere else who's had successes with Pinot Noir since then. And so it's this very outward looking, that's what they're doing in Burgundy. There's been a lot of money invested in trying to get Pinot Noir right here, and a lot of time and passion. And Josh Jensen from Calera Vineyards in California described it as the heartbreak grape. And I still think that's one of the best descriptions for Pinot Noir, because he said everything that can go wrong or right with any other grapevine, it's especially so with Pinot Noir. Now, I think there are other grape varieties that are equally fussy, but as people who've been growing and making Pinot Noir for over 40 years now, it has taken all of that 40 years to have confidence in our vines, in our vineyard, in our viticulture, and we're still working on that, and being confident in what we're doing in the winery. And that was moving away from sort of your modern Australian traditional winemaking techniques that were taught at Roseworthy and very risk-averse winemaking. It was about understanding what the soils gave to us, what sort of pHs we were getting in our juices. So there's some science there, but there's also some art in understanding how the pruning should be done and understanding what size crops you should be getting off the vines. My father is obsessed in all areas of these things, and his most recent obsession is regenerative farming. And so he's planting cover crops between the vines and really working on strengthening the soil and the subsoil life forces so the vines are stronger as a result. The age of the vines helps. The fact that we've now got good clones in the ground, including quite a lot of MV6. And I hate talking about clones because it's so geeky and it's so boring for anyone who doesn't care, but I'll do it very quickly. The MV6 being that clone that came out with the James Busby collection in the 1850s and was planted in New South Wales, came down to Victoria. There's a lot of people who are a bit sneery about it. We find it to be a very good base clone, but it needs other things to give it depth and light and shade and layers of flavour. And I think that Pinot Noir is like orchestral music, and you need to have different flavours coming from different parts of the vineyard, different clones. And we, over the years, we've always vinified all of our different parcels separately and looked at them as unblended wines first and learnt a lot about what goes with what and how that affects the structure and the flavour and the everything of wine. The other thing that I will say about Pinot Noir in Australia that I think is evolving still is with this little bit of, the global warming that we're seeing, a lot of regions are getting worried about losing perfume and delicacy in their wines, so they're picking earlier, they're doing less pigeage, less working the grapes with the juice during ferment, so less extraction of tannins. Down here, because of the marine influence on the Mornington Peninsula, we think we can still make wine in that sort of quite traditional way. We will give our Pinot Noir a good 3 weeks on skins. It's wild fermented, so it gets that pre-fermentation maceration. While it's fermenting, we do plunge it once or twice a day. When it's finished fermenting, we'll leave the skins in the wine for another few days until they start to sink. So we're really still looking at trying to extract tannin and colour and flavour from the skins, because I think that in the early days, Australian Pinot Noir was a bit light and unstructured. And these days, your earlier picked, lighter, more delicate versions of Pinot Noir still have enough structure to them to hold them together, but we're looking for some nice ripeness, some really good structure. It's not that surprising that the other grape variety that we're playing around with now is Nebbiolo, because we like wine with tannin. And I think that Pinot Noir, for a long time, people thought it was wine without tannin, and that's just not true. It's got velvety tannin, but it should be intense, because that makes it age well. That makes it good with food. And that makes you want to keep coming back for more hungry, thirsty wine.
Very good. And around the same time that we were having that conversation in 2013 about Pinot Noir, of course, Chardonnay was in a different zone, a different time of its life. It was emerging in some ways from ABC, but not exactly. I was working at a cellar door part-time
When
weekends.
was that? What year was that?
In 2013.
Yeah, right.
I was still doing shifts down at Stonia, and I heard you saying how you never let anyone not taste Chardonnay. I was exactly the same. I only had one person ever actually refuse.
Yeah.
But we only had Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I was like, well, you can't not taste Chardonnay. It's what we do.
It doesn't cost you any more to taste the Chardonnay. You can spit it out. You can say, yuck, that's disgusting if you really have to. But, just remember that it's my baby. So you could say it's an interesting wine. I still don't understand how people can say to a winemaker, yuck, that's disgusting. And I still get that at cellar door from time to time. And I'm like, I just laugh now. And I'm like, yeah, right. And your baby's ugly as well. But no, I think Chardonnay is, it's so exciting that Chardonnay's back in vogue and better than ever, because we went through those difficult times. People pulled out Chardonnay if they weren't passionate about it, if they weren't growing it in the right place. People who were passionate about it really thought long and hard about what it was that they loved about Chardonnay. And I think we all agree that Australian Chardonnay, well, anyone who loves Australian Chardonnay, anyone who loves Chardonnay and who's tasted Australian Chardonnay recently, I think is discovering or already knows that Australian Chardonnay is at a great place in world Chardonnay today. It's so exciting. Unfortunately, it coincides with some very small vintages of Chardonnay from quite a lot of high-end Chardonnay regions in Australia, certainly the Mornington Peninsula, certainly bits of Tassie, even the Yarra Valley's had some small crops over the last few years. We've had some difficult weather during flowering and fruit set, which is a shame because we could sell Chardonnay probably 5 times over what we've been able to make in the last 5 years. And that comes with such joy after those years in the desert when we had beautiful Chardonnay to sell and nobody wanted to even try it. So
yeah, but then again, this is the wine industry where usually people only want what they can't have. So
Totally.
if you had more Chardonnay, you probably have a problem. You never know.
Absolutely. And the other good piece of news is that instead of dumping it somewhere, we actually have a nice shed out the back where we put some of it down. So we're now re-releasing for our wine club and various select restaurants bits and pieces of aged Chardonnay, and it's delicious. 2011, which was a notoriously difficult year, but made some beautiful Chardonnays. 2012. There's some fun things to play with and to show people how well not only our wines taste when they're young, but how well they age. That's Chardonnay and Pinot Noir these days. And that was another misnomer about Australian Chardonnay and Pinot in general, and Mornington Peninsula Pinot as well. Got to drink it early. It's not going to age. The good stuff ages so well. 10, 15, 20 years.
Funnily enough, I'm doing a masterclass at the Mornington Peninsula Winter Wine Weekend about aged Chardonnay. And for sure, it's self-evident that those wines age beautifully and have a really lovely application with age. Although having said that, I'm not terribly good at holding on to it for that long.
No, well, that's one of the reasons we've held on to some for people. So, yeah, that sounds like a really fun masterclass.
Yeah, well, we're also doing one on Pinot Gris.
Yes.
Pinot Gris with spicy food is the pretext, really, but it's, I think, more of an excuse to talk about how Pinot Gris can be good when Pinot Gris is good and when it's interesting.
And that's kind of, after we got Chardonnay back over the hump, that was my next sort of project, was getting people to take, and I know that I'm not the only person, but getting people to take Pinot Gris seriously. And when it's good, it's so delicious. It's such a great food wine, and you can ferment it on skins and make an orange wine, or press it off its skins and make a white wine, and it's very versatile. Leave it on the vine for a long time and make a dessert wine or a sweet wine. I don't really like the nomenclature dessert wine because I find matching sweet food to sweet wine very disappointing. Sweet wine with cheese, yes, thank you very much. Sweet wine instead of dessert, absolutely.
On to other masses. You have been for some time, I don't know whether it started in COVID or whether it predated COVID, but Drinks with Kate.
Oh no, that was definitely a COVID project.
Yeah.
It started in March in 2020. When we were all running around like headless chooks going, oh my God, what are we going to do? The world has ended. How can we possibly sell any wine? I started doing it then. I had a dream of doing online tasting for years before that. I couldn't work out how I could do something that would bring people to watch it and join in. Because before COVID, we weren't very good at doing things online. And then we got very good very quickly. Although I do remember when we started, I thought, well, if I'm ever going to give this a go, we'll do it now. I thought we might last for 6 weeks. And the very first one that I did, I looked back at it recently and it went for about 10 minutes and we had 2 wines, compare and contrast. And the first feedback I got from people was, we're stuck at home with just me and the wife. I can't open 2 bottles of wine on a Thursday night because it's not going to be a good way to start or finish. And I went, okay, 1 bottle of wine. Because I also wasn't interested in like breaking bottles of wine down. So I came up with a super, super simple idea that I thought might keep us amused for a couple of months and then everything would go back to normal. But it seems to have stuck. And the idea was 6 bottles of wine every 2 months. We drink a bottle of wine together on a Thursday night at 6 o'clock. Anyone who wants to tune in, whether they bought the wine or not, can. It's on YouTube. My research was dreadful. I was like, I should do it on Instagram. And previous cellar door manager Jeff said, old people have real trouble with Instagram. Why don't we do something really easy? And I'm like what? And he said, have you looked at YouTube? And I'm like, I don't know. And I looked at it and I went, hey, that's pretty easy. So YouTube, all the videos are up. If anyone wants to go back and really like have a fun weekend, all the videos from the last 7 years are up there under Moorooduc Estate Live. That's our channel. I probably should go in there and cull it a little bit, but who's got time for that? But at our height, we had almost 100 households logging in, and I have had the most incredible feedback from people since those days. We had one member who had been recently widowed and was locked down with her grief on her own. and her husband had been into wine, and she hadn't been able to even look at a glass of wine until a friend of hers told her about Drinks with Kate, and she's still part of the community. And it is a community. Some of us call it a cult. But it's and we had families who emailed me, a year or 2 or 3 afterwards saying, our daughter or our son or our kids are so traumatised by this time that they're doing year 11, they're doing year 12, they're locking themselves in their room, they won't come out for anything. They come out for Drinks with Kate, and they'll have a glass of wine with their parents and sit around and talk. And so I didn't mean for it to be any of that. I was just a desperate kind of, in the early days, it was like, what can I do to entertain myself and maybe sell some wine and just try this out? And it just worked really well. And I think I did lots of dumb stuff, lots of silly talks, lots of serious conversations. During the lockdowns, we said I love you a lot to each other because I'd heard that Jacinta Parsons did it on ABC Radio a lot, and it kind of resonated with me because I think that when you're not able to connect with people face to face and you don't have someone bringing a bit of silliness and a bit of joy into your life, then just hearing that from time to time is nice. And we've been on a trip to South Australia last year together. So at the height, we had about 100 households checking in. Got about 30 that come back regularly still, and they're our most important members of our wine club now. So you can join the wine club and subscribe. Buy the case. It's always a mixed case. These days we always have a guest wine, and we're sort of jumping around visiting friends near and far. We're mostly doing Australian wines. We did a few imported wines, and we'll do a few more down the track, but the general consensus is that people want to drink a lot of Moorooduc, and we've got some nice back vintage stuff, and we've got some nice experimental wines that can be just for them, and some new releases, and they come along to all of our tastings, and we've made some really lovely friends.
So cool. And we've had a few conversations with the likes of Bree Stock last time around, and Meg Brodtmann and Andrew Putzka.
Yep.
All your fellow MWs,
Yeah.
yes, about how that feedback as well is really interesting because it comes from so many different people and so many different angles, but it's what also means that you can actually do something that sounds terribly repetitive time and again because it's always kind of new. And I was going to ask you about WSET as well because we're about to start another course. And, you couldn't really get much more on paper regimented than the idea that we're going through, the same set of sessions and the same talking points and a very similar set of wines, etc., etc. But somehow it's actually quite easy to start with a new cohort. What is it about teaching that you find so rejuvenating?
I think it's a lot of people come to a wine course, feeling really intimidated by the whole subject. And I think that wine should not be intimidating. Wine should be inclusive. I mean, I hear so many different definitions of, wine shouldn't be expensive, wine shouldn't be fancy. If everyone can't access and drink that bottle of wine, then it has no validity. I don't think that's true. But I think wine knowledge should not be something that is special to a small segment of society. I think everyone can learn how to talk about and taste wine better and finding that joy in doing it. And the first session of WSET2 is always fascinating because we show them some really different wines and we show them a really high-end Gewürztraminer with some residual sugar from Alsace, and we show them a Barolo, but we also show them a couple of more entry-level things. And the Barolo just freaks them out completely, and they're like, oh, that's awful, so often. And then you have to talk about why it's not awful, and why it's not in the right context, and why it's okay for them to not like it, but also to understand that that doesn't make it a bad wine, in the same way that there are wines that I don't like that I know are world-class examples of what they are. It's just those flavours don't work for me. The other one that I always find fascinating when we show it to them, and we don't have access to it anymore, is the White Zinfandel from America. Because they're even quite sophisticated people in the class go, oh, yum, that's delicious. It's like, really? Taste it again. It tastes like lolly water. So it's just having those conversations with people, and particularly down here on the peninsula where a lot of people go straight into working in restaurants or wine bars or cellar doors straight from school. They don't have a lot of world experience. Like, they learn the wines of the Mornington Peninsula and then they kind of go, well, all wine's the same, isn't it? And having that conversation with them and having that tasting with them where you can say, well, yes, all wine is made from squashed grapes and the sugar's turned into alcohol and blah, blah, blah. But look what it tastes like when it's made from these grapes and made over here and made in this way compared to these grapes made over here. And the aha moments when people start interacting with the wine, and different people interact at different times. Like I've had people in the class for the first 6 of 8 sessions just sitting there like, and you say, would you like to read your tasting note out? And they're like, oh, I don't really know. Or they'll read a couple of things out and we'll talk about it. And then on week 7 or week 8, they'll be like, oh, can I have a go at this one? And you're like, yes. And very few people go away from that course the same person that they were when they started. But yeah, teaching is amazing. That was the other thing I thought I might do if if theatre didn't work out for me and the travel business didn't kind of, rock my socks. I thought I'd go back and do a teaching degree. And I've always loved teaching. And from the very early days when I was a gap girl in Oxford, their drama teacher was on sabbatical. And so I taught drama for 6 months. And it was so fun, seeing these snotty little sad boarding school girls who didn't know where they stood in life, taking on roles in plays and gaining confidence, and you could see them blossoming. And you see the same thing with people when they learn about wine. That extra knowledge makes people more beautiful on the inside and out. You can see it in their eyes. You can just see it in their confidence. They walk differently. And that sounds ridiculous because it's just wine. But having that knowledge and being able to go out into the world and share that knowledge with other people, it's really cool.
Yeah, but as you say, like even online with Drinks with Kate, you see that interaction between different people in an arena that was actually really quite hard to connect in some ways, and yet it happens there. And that's in a classroom, which is another relatively sterile place. So imagine what happens when you get out of that classroom into another environment.
And you go and visit a winery with some people. And, the Drinks with Kate trip that we did last year to South Australia was really lovely for that, and had a lot of fun. But it's a lot of work organising trips. But you're right. I think going out and exploring new places and places that you've only read about in a book or looked at maps of makes so much difference. Actually going and standing in the vineyard and smelling the air and looking at the view.
I think another thing that can be a bit intimidating or certainly confusing from the outside, as it were, looking in, is the fact that so many elements of the wine industry tend to look at other elements of the wine industry and put them down in isolation. Say wine judging, wine shows, or critic scores, or sommelier gatekeepers. There's always something that is being somehow denigrated by another part of the industry, and people saying that it's not a valid part of the conversation. And I think when you're good at this, like you are, at communication, and when you talk about Moorooduc, you're not really just talking about Moorooduc. Let's face it, you're also being an advocate for wine and for the Mornington Peninsula and for the culture of food and wine and for conviviality and travel and all these different things, that it seems almost quite easy, but also it's cold comfort sometimes that you've got a name for that when the culture that you work within seems a little bit hopeless at moving forward or showing its best side. Wine could be a great benefit, I think, maybe to society in the way it makes us look at the world around us, but also in the way that it helps us connect with each other. But at the same time, we're not doing a great job all the time. So what's happening there?
Look, I think we get ourselves twisted up and turned around, don't we? And we see enemies on all sides. And as a wine industry, I think we need to be better at, as you say, being a bit more inclusive and not saying, that's bad and that's good. I think trying to understand wine in a simple mathematical way doesn't work, which is why I think some people have trouble with the scoring system. There's so much wine out there and there's very little understanding, or dare I say, always interest from the casual drinker in the complexities of what brought that wine to the table. And so I think making that storytelling more appealing, keeping it less jargonistic, and looking at everything that's good about wine without shying away from the fact that it's also complexly difficult. Everyone's competing for a piece of the pie and everyone's worrying about all these people who are not drinking anymore because they drank too much during COVID, or because they're young and they don't relate to wine and they're interested in other things instead, or they're young and they don't want to do what their parents did. It's like, if we keep just talking about all of these negative things, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. What is the best way to get past that? It's having these kind of conversations. The idea that the wine industry is one big happy family is fallacious. And I think that there's lots of different people who are creating wine for lots of different reasons. And I think that not everybody has to love everything, but you need to find your people and you need to work on expanding that group and being true to your beliefs and what you're wanting to do.
One of the approaches to dealing with the complexity of wine is that people tend to try and shut down curiosity at some level. And that might be by saying that scores are bad. Scores may not be everything, of course they're not. By just making that judgment, you're, in a sense, actually shutting down curiosity, in a sense. Like, why? What's good about a wine critic's judgment? Why is it helpful? Why is it not? Where does that limit come? Same with wine shows, potentially. But even demystifying wine, in a sense, is shutting down curiosity, because what if I want to know more?
I think also being able to voice an opinion about wine without saying I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. It should be more encouraged. I remember going to a tasting of some wines, can't remember where they were from, but it was somewhere in Central Europe, and there were a whole lot of really interesting grape varieties that spoke of foreign places and different things. And there was this one wine that was made from Riesling, amphora. You know, a whole lot of young sommeliers in the room. And someone said, oh, okay, Kate, what were you most excited about and what were you least excited about here? And I talked about a couple of the wines I was excited about. And I said, do you know what, this amphora Riesling is the least exciting one for me in the room. And there was this audible gasp because I was, how dare I? And I said, Riesling's not an Indigenous variety for the region. That's okay. But the amphora treatment has made it taste not of Riesling or of where it comes from. It's made it taste like amphora. And I don't understand it, and that's okay. But it's also much less exciting than all of these other things. And a friend of mine sent me a screenshot of a tweet that one of the sommeliers in the room had made saying, oh, bloody Kate McIntyre MW, corporate winemaker, doesn't like amphora wines. Typical. So I'm like, I'm like, oh my God, you can like it. That's fine. I just thought, how sad that they didn't put their hand up and say that in the room so we could have had a conversation about it. Instead, they had to heckle me on social media. And how sad that was the response, rather than going, oh, well, I don't agree with her, but isn't it nice that we've all got different opinions and she can drink her wine and I'll drink my wine and we can have a nice conversation about it.
So speaking of, it's Friday on the Mornington Peninsula. You're probably going to have a drink later on. Before we get to what that might be, we haven't even mentioned champagne, which I think is one of your predilections, but what would you say that wine, I mean, given that it wasn't kind of supposed to be, you were kind of play acting a little bit at it in a shop a long time ago, and now here you are in the vineyard, you're doing work in the winery, but you're also doing everything in between here at Moorooduc Estate. What would you say wine has brought you in life?
It's kind of defined who I am, really, over the last, I've been saying 20 years for about 10 years. I've been working in the wine industry of my own volition for about 30 years, and that's terrifying. But it's also really awesome because there's still more to learn. And I went through a phase halfway through my MW studies that I had to stop, and I had to take 6 months off because I hated wine. I got myself so tied up in knots about what I was trying to do, and everything that I put on my mouth tasted the same. I hated it. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I just went, okay, I'm just going to step back and take 6 months off. And I came back at it with a renewed vigour, and that's when I started passing exams because I got my head in the right space. I think that's the only time ever that I've hated wine. And I'm always curious to taste something new, and it doesn't have to be something that I've never tasted before, because that's the cool thing about wine, is that after it's been in the bottle for another 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, it's something new, even if it's the same wine. So of course I do taste and drink more Moorooduc wine these days than I used to, because it's my job and it's a constant checking, and because we do drinks with Kate every week, then blah. But I also am always looking for other things that I'm excited about. And that brings me back to the whole, in the early days, I was looking out and it was Burgundy and it was Italy and it was Spain. And I still love those wines from those places. I drink them less because they got more expensive. But also I'm having a really lovely time exploring wines from closer to home. Wines made by friends. The wine industry is not having the funnest time at the moment. And so I made a pact to myself back in the COVID days again. One day we'll be able to talk about wine and our careers and not talk about those lockdown years. But back in those days I went, okay, I need to support my friends and hopefully they'll support me back. And so I started buying wine from a few different places. Today, it's a bit tough out there and there are people doing it really hard and who are making beautiful wine in Australia. So I'm buying and drinking more Australian wine than ever before, which is exciting. I get really bored with samey wines. I like following little paths, different places. Tocco Friulano, I love from Italy. The Queelies are doing amazing things with that grape variety down here. I wish more people would. Not sure if I've been able to convince Dad to plant a few vines in our experimental rows. We've got 2 rows that are unplanted at the moment, and there's going to be some experimental things going in there just to see what happens. Someone said to me the other day, can you just drink a glass of wine and just enjoy it? And I can, but the way I just drink a glass of wine and just enjoy it would annoy the hell out of most people, because I look at the colour and I look at the clarity and I smell it and I muse on what I smell when I first smell it and then how it opens up over time, and then I put it in my mouth and I slurp it and slosh it around because I want to get everything out of that glass. I don't want to drink it quickly and get pissed. I want all the other stuff first. So my friends think it's completely wanky.
Okay, so it's Friday night and you have got your favourite absurdist dramatist coming to dinner. Your mother's cooking.
Yes.
And you got some other winemaker friends coming over, or other friends. What wine are you bringing and what are you eating?
Wow. I always like to surprise people with wine. Mum made very recently a really beautiful Alsace-style onion tart. And any day of the week, I would very happily serve a good Pinot Gris or Gewürztraminer from Alsace. I reckon my mate Barney Flanders makes a really cool skinsy Gewürztraminer that's very fun to spring on people. If we're talking about absurdist theatre people, then they can deal with some absurdist crazy wines as well. I think that's a nice place to start if we didn't start with champagne. And as you alluded earlier, champagne is another great love. The first wine region that I went to as an adult, when I was living in France, in Lyon, doing my dissertation, a friend and I jumped on a train and went to Champagne, and we stayed in a youth hostel. It was February, weekend, middle of winter, no one was open. We went to Mumm because they were open, and we went to Mercier because they were open, and we bought a bottle of champagne from each of those places, even though we couldn't afford it. We went to the market and bought some smelly cheese and some garlic sausage and some baguette, and we went back to our hostel room and ate the stinky cheese and the sausage and drank the champagne out of the bottles, and it was bloody fantastic. So that's always been a really special thing for me. So we would have a bottle of champagne. It would be from someone fun. I do love the Pierre Peters wines. I've discovered a fairly affordable champagne called Mr. Collins, Champagne Collin. I think it's brought in by the Door to Door guys, but that's delicious. Any day with a glass of champagne in it is a good day, as far as I'm concerned. If I'm not drinking champagne, I think there's some really cool sparkling wines coming out of Tassie. And I tasted the Belbon, the new Blanc de Blanc, late last year. That's delicious. Natalie's making some gorgeous wine, and the Delamere wines are also fabulous.
Oh, they're good.
Yeah, really good. And Ed Carr is a genius, so anything that Ed has a hand in is pretty cool too. So after I've lulled them with champagne, challenged them with skinsy Pinot Gris or Gewürztraminer, then probably for main course we would have something slow braised and meaty. It might be lamb, it might be beef, and we would have maybe a Barolo with a bit of age on it, maybe a Pinot Noir, either from here or from one of my friends, or if I found something fun in the cellar, from Burgundy. But I've had some really nice New Zealand Pinot recently. They're doing quite well over there these days. If we're having duck, then it has to be Pinot. If it's other things, then it could be Pinot. It could be Barolo. It could be a beautiful Chianti. So see, I struggle to get away from Italy, but I have been really enjoying beautiful Sue Bell's Bellwether Cabernets with a little bit of age on them. She's got some nice back vintage stuff that she was selling. I had an 06 with some friends recently, and that was pretty delicious as well. So, you know, we're a bit spoilt for choice, aren't we?
That's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share it everywhere. Please don't underestimate the power of these endorsements in making it possible to produce original, thoughtful work. You can also subscribe to my Substack. That's edmerison.substack.com. For now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, Patricio Garcia for additional editing, and to my guest, Kate McIntyre MW. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers!